My name is Nora Everly, and I'm a hospice nurse. Before I share my experience, I want you to know that what happened to me wasn't just an accident. It was a divine appointment that completely transformed how I see life, death, and everything in between. For 15 years, I had dedicated my career to hospice care, sitting with hundreds of patients during their final moments on Earth. I believed I understood death. I thought I knew what waited on the other side. I had witnessed so many peaceful transitions, held so many hands as their owners took their final breaths. I had comforted countless families, explaining that their loved ones were in a better place now. But I was speaking from assumption, not experience. That all changed on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in April. It started like any other day. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., made coffee, and spent some quiet time reading my Bible before heading to work. I had always been a woman of faith, raised in the church, devoted to prayer, committed to serving others. But if I'm being honest, over the years, my faith had become something like comfortable background music, rather than the passionate symphony it once was. Too many deathbeds, perhaps. Too many unanswered questions. Too many times watching good people suffer while I stood by, helpless to do anything but manage their pain. Don't misunderstand. I loved my work and believed in its value, but something in me had grown numb, protective. That morning, I had been assigned to help with some equipment maintenance at our hospice facility. We were updating some of our electrical systems, and I was helping coordinate which rooms would be worked on when to minimize disruption to our patients. I remember checking the time, 7:42 a.m., and thinking I needed to hurry if I wanted to visit Mrs. Wilkins before the electricians started working near her room. She had been having a difficult night, and I wanted to make sure she was comfortable. I walked into the supply room to gather some materials. It was when I reached up to pull a box from a high shelf that everything went terribly wrong. Later, I would learn that faulty wiring had electrified the metal shelving unit. The moment my hand touched the metal edge, 220 volts of electricity surged through my body. I had no time to scream, no moment to react. 1 second I was reaching up, the next, darkness. What the medical report would later state in clinical terms was that I experienced ventricular fibrillation due to the electrical shock. My heart stopped beating effectively. I collapsed to the floor, unresponsive, not breathing. Clinical death. My colleague Emma found me approximately 2 minutes later when she came looking for supplies. She immediately called a code and began CPR. The emergency team arrived quickly, as we were already in a medical facility. They worked frantically, applying the defibrillator, administering epinephrine, doing everything possible to restart my heart. For 16 minutes and 20 seconds, by their documentation, I remained clinically dead. But while my colleagues fought to bring me back to my body, I was experiencing something else entirely, something that would forever change me. The first thing I remember is the sensation of floating. There was no pain. The burning, seizing agony of electrocution was simply gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I was aware that something monumental had happened, but I felt no fear, no panic. I could see my body below me, splayed awkwardly on the supply room floor. Emma was performing chest compressions, tears streaming down her face as she counted aloud. Dr. Brennan had arrived and was preparing the defibrillator. Several nurses stood by with emergency medications. "Clear!" Dr. Brennan called, and I watched dispassionately as my body arched with the shock, then fell limply back to the floor. It was the strangest feeling. I could see everything happening with perfect clarity, yet I felt completely detached from it. The woman on the floor wasn't me anymore. I was elsewhere, witnessing but not participating. I floated higher, moving through the ceiling as though it were merely a projection rather than solid matter. I could see into the hallway where more staff were rushing toward the supply room. I could see into patient rooms where, oblivious to the emergency, several hospice patients slept peacefully. In Mrs. Wilkins' room, I saw her sitting up in bed, her eyes fixed on a corner of the ceiling. Her face, which had been etched with pain for weeks, now held an expression of wonder. Could she sense what was happening? I never got the chance to ask her. She passed away 3 days after I returned, while I was still recovering. As I continued to rise, I became aware of a sound, not quite music, but something like harmonic vibrations that seemed to resonate with my very essence. And then I saw it, a pinpoint of light that rapidly expanded into what I can only describe as a tunnel. This light was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't the harsh fluorescence of the hospital or the warm glow of a lamp. It was luminescent, but soft, radiant without being blinding. The tunnel itself seemed to have corrugated sides, like ripples of energy flowing toward a central point. At first, I remember thinking, this is it? This is the famous light at the end of the tunnel that everyone talks about? It's smaller than I expected. But as I thought this, I began moving toward it, or perhaps it expanded toward me. I wasn't traveling in the physical sense. It was more like being drawn forward by gentle but irresistible gravity. The movement itself was extraordinary. I wasn't prone as my body had been. I was upright, moving forward, and my awareness extended in all directions at once. I could still sense what was happening behind me in the supply room. More people had arrived. Someone was on the phone. The defibrillator whined as it charged again. But my focus was overwhelmingly on what lay ahead. As I entered the tunnel, I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see distinct forms or faces, but I sensed others traveling alongside me, each on their own journey, but somehow connected to mine. There was a profound feeling of familiarity, as though I was returning to a place I had known before my earthly life began. The tunnel seemed to accelerate, light streaking past me like stars in a science fiction movie. And then suddenly I emerged into vastness. The space I entered defies earthly description. It wasn't a room or a landscape as we understand them. There were no walls, no ceiling, no horizon, just an infinite expanse that somehow felt intimate rather than intimidating. The light was everywhere, not emanating from any particular source, but simply existing as part of the environment itself. The closest I can come to describing the color is to say it was like the most perfect dawn you've ever witnessed. Soft pinks and golds and a quality of light that seemed alive. But even that comparison falls woefully short. What struck me most powerfully was the sense of homecoming. Every cell of my being resonated with recognition. I know this place, I thought. I've been here before. It wasn't déjà vu, it was remembrance. As I adjusted to this new reality, I became aware that the light itself seemed to have texture, layers of luminescence that shifted and flowed like the gentlest ocean currents. Within these currents, I could discern what appeared to be mathematical patterns of perfect symmetry and complexity. It was as though I was witnessing the very fabric of creation, the underlying structure of all existence laid bare before me. The atmosphere, if that's even the right word, carried fragrances that evoked memories I didn't know I had. The scent of gardens I'd never visited, spices I'd never tasted, flowers that don't exist on Earth. Each breath, though I wasn't breathing in any physical sense, brought new wonders, new revelations of beauty. Time behaved differently here. I had the distinct sensation that a single moment contained eternity, that I could explore any direction of thought or feeling for what seemed like years and still return to the same cosmic now. There was no hurry, no anxiety about what came next, just a perfect contentment with being fully present. And then came the love. If the lighting defies description, the love I experienced is even more impossible to convey in human language. It was as though every loving moment I had ever experienced in my life, my mother's embraces, my first romance, the profound connection with my patients, were merely shadows, pale imitations of this all-encompassing love that now surrounded me. This love penetrated every aspect of my being, like light through crystal. It wasn't just emotional, it was physical, mental, spiritual, existing in dimensions I hadn't known were possible. It communicated directly to the core of who I was, bypassing all defenses and self-deceptions. In its presence, I felt utterly known and completely accepted. I understood with sudden clarity that this love was the fundamental reality of the universe, that underneath all suffering, all confusion, all conflict, this love remains the foundation of existence. I realized that everything in creation is held together by this force, this divine intention that precedes and outlasts all other realities. It poured into me from every direction, filling spaces within me that I hadn't even realized were empty. It was unconditional, complete, perfect acceptance, and I understood instinctively that this was the love of God. As this revelation washed over me, I became aware of movement within the light, presences that drew nearer as I acclimated to my new surroundings. These weren't physical forms as we understand them, but distinct consciousnesses, each radiating their own unique quality of light and love. Some of these presences felt incredibly familiar, though I couldn't name them. They communicated without words, sending waves of welcome and joy that I felt rather than heard. Others seemed to be continuing on their own journeys, moving deeper into the light with purpose and anticipation. I noticed that some souls appeared to be waiting, gathered in what I can only describe as communities of light. They seemed oriented toward the physical realm, as though watching and waiting for loved ones still living. I sensed that they were engaged in work beyond my understanding, perhaps guiding, perhaps praying, perhaps simply bearing witness to the lives unfolding below. The environment itself seemed responsive to thought. When I wondered about a particular aspect of this realm, the light would shift, revealing new dimensions of understanding. It was as though reality itself collaborated with consciousness, eager to answer unspoken questions. I wasn't alone in this realization. I became aware of presences around me, souls, for lack of a better word. Some seemed to be continuing on their own journeys, moving deeper into the light. Others appeared to be waiting, though for what I couldn't tell. And then, he was there. I didn't see him approach. One moment I was alone in my awareness, and the next, he was present with me. I knew immediately, without introduction or explanation, that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. His appearance wasn't what artists typically portray, or perhaps it was, but that wasn't what mattered. What I perceived most strongly was his essence, his being. He emanated authority and power, yet at the same time, such gentleness and compassion that I felt completely safe. His presence carried both ancient wisdom and timeless youth simultaneously. He existed in paradox, completely divine, yet perfectly human, supremely powerful, yet infinitely tender, utterly holy, yet intimately approachable. In his company, these contradictions resolved into a harmony that made perfect sense, though I cannot explain how. What struck me immediately was how familiar he felt, not as one recognizes a celebrity from photographs, but as one recognizes a beloved friend after long absence. There was an instant knowing between us, as though he had known me from before my birth, and would know me beyond my death, which, of course, he had and would. His eyes, oh, his eyes. They looked at me with such intimate knowledge, such complete understanding, that I felt truly seen for the first time in my life. Every defense, every pretense, every mask I had ever worn fell away under that gaze. These weren't simply eyes that saw my exterior. They were windows into perfect compassion that perceived every moment of my existence simultaneously. Past, present, future, all were equally present to him. I could sense that he knew every choice I had ever made, every thought I had ever conceived, every word I had ever spoken, and yet there was not a shred of condemnation in his regard. His gaze held galaxies of wisdom and oceans of tears. I could see that he had wept over humanity's suffering, that he had carried burdens I couldn't comprehend, that he understood pain in ways that transcended human experience. And yet, overwhelming joy emanated from him as well. Delight in creation, pleasure in relationship, celebration of love's triumph. And yet, there was no judgment in his eyes, only infinite love and acceptance. I could feel that he knew every mistake I had ever made, every unkind thought, every moment of doubt and rebellion. And he loved me completely anyway. "Nora," he said, and my name in his voice sounded like the most beautiful music ever composed. His voice itself was both thunderous and gentle, resonating not just in my ears, but throughout my entire being. When he spoke my name, it wasn't merely a sound or a label. It was a revelation of my true identity, who I was created to be, beneath all the accumulated layers of fear, pride, and misconception. I heard in those 2 syllables the original design of my soul, the blueprint of my deepest self that existed in God's mind before time began. His voice carried authority that seemed to command the very atoms of existence, yet it was warm with affection and alive with humor. I sensed that he took genuine delight in my presence, that meeting with me was not an obligation, but a pleasure. In his countenance, I saw that I was valued beyond measure, treasured beyond reason, loved beyond comprehension. I wanted to fall at his feet, to worship, but found myself instead being drawn closer, as though embraced. Though I couldn't see physical arms around me, the sensation of being held was overwhelming. This embrace transcended physical contact. It was a complete enfolding of my being by his, spirit to spirit, essence to essence. Within this embrace, I experienced total security, absolute acceptance, perfect belonging. All my lifelong questions about worth, purpose, and identity dissolved in the certainty of this connection. As he held me in this spiritual embrace, I became aware of wounds in his being, not physical injuries as we understand them, but sacred scars that somehow enhanced, rather than diminished, his beauty. These wounds radiated a particular quality of love that spoke of sacrifice, of suffering willingly embraced for the sake of others. I understood without words that these were the eternal marks of crucifixion, transformed now into fountains of healing and redemption. "It's not your time," he said, and I felt a pang of disappointment so acute it would have taken my breath away if I had been breathing. His words were spoken with both firmness and tenderness, like a parent explaining a necessary but painful truth to a beloved child. I could sense the wisdom behind them, the perfect knowledge of times and seasons that informed his decision. And yet, having tasted the perfect peace of his presence, the thought of returning to the limitations of physical existence felt almost unbearable. "Please," I heard myself say, though I wasn't speaking with a physical voice, "please let me stay. It's so beautiful here, so peaceful. I don't want to go back." In that moment, my entire earthly life seemed like a shadow compared to the vibrant reality I now experienced. The thought of returning to pain, to limitation, to the veil that separates humans from direct perception of God's presence. It felt like being asked to exchange a palace for a prison cell. I began to explain all the reasons why I deserved to stay. My years of service as a hospice nurse, the comfort I had brought to the dying, my faithful attendance at church, my charitable giving, my attempts to live a good Christian life. As the words poured out of me, I realized how hollow they sounded, how insufficient in the face of his perfect love. Even as I listed my accomplishments, I could see them from his perspective. How mixed my motives had often been, how frequently I had helped others out of duty rather than love, how many times I had given to receive recognition rather than from genuine compassion. In his presence, all self-deception fell away, leaving only naked truth. He listened patiently, with such tender compassion that tears would have formed if I had still been in my physical body. When I finally ran out of words, he asked a simple question that pierced to the core of my being. "Nora, have you ever loved anyone the way you are being loved right now?" His question wasn't asked to shame or condemn me. It was presented with genuine curiosity, as an invitation to self-reflection. And in the asking, he granted me the grace to see my own love with new clarity, its genuine beauty, as well as its human limitations. Scenes from my life played before me, moments of real tenderness with patience, instances of forgiveness offered to those who had hurt me, times when I had sacrificed my own comfort for others. I saw that these were precious and authentic expressions of love, seeds of the divine planted in human soil. Yet alongside these, I saw the boundaries of my love, the conditions I placed on it, the ways I withheld it as punishment, the people I deemed unworthy of receiving it, the times I offered it as performance rather than gift. I saw how often fear had constrained my love, how frequently pride had distorted it, how commonly self-protection had diminished it. The question stunned me into silence. In the light of that perfect love, I could see the answer clearly. My love, even at its best, had been conditional, limited, flawed. I had loved when it was convenient, when people met my expectations, when they didn't disappoint or hurt me. I had withheld love as punishment, offered it as reward. I had loved with human imperfection. "No," I admitted, feeling small and humbled. "That's impossible. I'm only human." Even as I spoke these words, I recognized them as both truth and excuse. The limitations of human nature are real, and yet, I could now see that I had often used them as justification for not striving toward the divine ideal of love that had always been presented to me through Christ's example. His response wasn't spoken as words, but communicated directly to my soul, an overwhelming sense that this was precisely why I needed to return. I had more to learn about love, not just to receive it, but to give it, to become a channel for the divine love I was experiencing now. In this wordless communication, I understood that my earthly life wasn't just about my own spiritual journey. It was about how that journey affected others. Each person whose path crossed mine represented an opportunity to share something of the love I was now experiencing. My remaining time on earth was precious, not despite its limitations, but because of them. Because within those constraints, the choice to love becomes meaningful in ways impossible to fully comprehend from eternity's perspective. "You can do better," he said gently, "and I will help you." This wasn't a rebuke, but a promise, an affirmation of potential and an offer of partnership. I understood that he wasn't sending me back alone, that the presence I experienced now would accompany me, that the love surrounding me would remain available even when I couldn't feel it directly. I felt a surge of courage at his words, a willingness to return that hadn't existed moments before. If he believed I could do better, could love more fully, more faithfully, more like him, then perhaps the return journey had purpose beyond what I could currently comprehend. What happened next is difficult to describe chronologically, because time itself seemed different in that place. It was as though past, present, and future existed simultaneously, and I was granted access to understanding that transcended linear time. Jesus began to show me the purpose of human life, the reason for our existence. It unfolded before me like a living tapestry, each thread connected to countless others, creating a pattern of breathtaking complexity and beauty. "Look," he said, and suddenly I could see my own life from a perspective I had never imagined possible. I saw moments when I thought I was alone, but was actually surrounded by divine presence. I saw seemingly random encounters that had been divinely orchestrated. I saw how my choices had affected others in ways I had never realized. Most profoundly, I saw the moments when I had been an instrument of God's love, often without knowing it. A kind word to a discouraged colleague, a gentle touch that brought comfort to a dying patient, a sincere prayer offered for someone in need. This is why you are here, Jesus explained. Not to accumulate accomplishments or possessions, not to seek comfort or avoid pain. You are here to learn to love as I love, to become love as I am love. I saw that every circumstance in our lives, the joyful and the painful alike, is an opportunity to grow in love. The difficult colleague, the demanding patient, the friend who betrays trust, the family member who disappoints, all are teachers, offering chances to expand our capacity to love beyond our natural human limitations. He continued, "The greatest gift you can give is to love others as I have loved you. Unconditionally, without expectation of return, without reservation or limit." He showed me how our world is starving for this kind of love. I saw people walking through their days carrying invisible burdens of shame, fear, and loneliness. I saw how a small act of genuine love could penetrate those burdens, bringing light to darkness. I saw how transformation happens, one heart at a time, through the patient, persistent application of divine love expressed through human vessels. "This is what it means to be made in my image," he said. "To be capable of this kind of love. It's already within you, waiting to be fully realized." I understood then that heaven isn't just a destination we reach after death. It's something we help create on earth when we allow God's love to flow through us without obstruction. Each time we choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, compassion over judgment, we bring a little more of heaven to earth. The understanding filled me with both awe and a new sense of purpose. This was the answer to questions I had carried throughout my years as a hospice nurse. This was why I had been drawn to sit with the dying, to witness their final moments, because in those sacred transitions, the veil between worlds grows thin, and love becomes the only thing that matters. As these revelations washed over me, I became aware of something else, something urgent and compelling. Jesus was showing me specific people who needed the love I could bring, conversations that needed to happen, relationships that needed healing. I saw future patients whose lives would intersect with mine, family members I had taken for granted, colleagues I had kept at a distance. "They need what you now know," he told me. "They need to be reminded of who they truly are and why they're here. They need to know they are loved beyond measure, just as they are." The responsibility felt enormous, but as I considered it, I realized I wouldn't be doing it alone. The same divine presence that surrounded me now would be with me always, guiding my words and actions if I remained open to that guidance. "Will you go back and share this love?" Jesus asked, though it wasn't really a question. He knew my answer before I did. "Yes," I heard myself reply. "I will try." And with those words, everything changed. The return. The transition back was not gentle. One moment I was enveloped in perfect peace and understanding. The next I was being violently pulled away from it. The sensation was like being yanked backward through rushing water, disorienting and traumatic. The tunnel reappeared, but now I was moving through it in reverse, the light receding with alarming speed. I wanted to cry out, to reach back toward what I was leaving, but I had no control over the journey. As I was pulled back through the tunnel, I received one final message, not in words, but in pure understanding. Remember, everything is about love. Nothing else matters. And then I slammed back into my body with a jolt that felt like hitting concrete after falling from a great height. Pain. That was my first physical sensation. Every nerve ending screamed in protest as my consciousness reintegrated with my damaged body. My chest felt crushed, my throat raw, my skin burning where the electricity had entered and exited. I heard voices around me, urgent and excited. "We've got a pulse. BP coming up. Pupils responsive. Nora? Nora, can you hear me?" I tried to speak but could only manage a groan. My eyes fluttered open to see Dr. Brennan leaning over me, her face etched with concern and relief. "She's back," someone said, and the room erupted in activity. I was quickly transferred to a gurney and rushed to the ICU. The next several hours passed in a blur of tests, treatments, and examinations. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each time I woke remembering more clearly what had happened, what I had experienced, what I had been shown. By evening, I was stable enough to speak briefly with the medical team. They explained that I had suffered cardiac arrest due to electrical shock. My heart had stopped for 16 minutes and 20 seconds before they were able to resuscitate me. By all medical understanding, I should have suffered significant brain damage from oxygen deprivation. The fact that I appeared neurologically intact was, in their words, remarkable and unexplainable. But I knew the explanation. I had been somewhere else during those 16 minutes and 20 seconds. Somewhere beyond time, beyond pain, beyond the limitations of physical existence. As night fell and the hospital quieted, I lay awake in my ICU bed, my body battered but my spirit more alive than it had ever been. The memory of what I had experienced remained crystal clear, unlike a dream that fades upon waking. Every detail, every revelation, every moment in the presence of divine love remained vividly present. I wept quietly, tears streaming down my face, not from pain or fear, but from an overwhelming sense of gratitude mixed with responsibility. I had been given an extraordinary gift of understanding, and now I needed to find a way to share it. In those quiet hours, I made my commitment. Whatever time I had left on this earth would be dedicated to loving more deeply, more authentically, more completely than I ever had before. I would strive to become a clearer channel for the divine love I had experienced, to let it flow through me to everyone I encountered. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The habits of a lifetime don't change overnight. The limitations of human nature don't simply disappear because of one transcendent experience. But I also knew I wouldn't be doing it alone. The presence I had encountered would be with me, guiding me, strengthening me, loving through me if I remained open and willing. As dawn broke on what felt like the first day of a new life, I whispered a prayer of surrender and commitment. Help me remember. Help me love as you love. Help me share what I've been shown. And somewhere deep within me, I felt a resonance of that perfect love in response. A gentle assurance that what had begun would continue, that what had been revealed would unfold, that what had been promised would be fulfilled. The months following my near-death experience unfolded like pages in a new book, each day revealing deeper dimensions of the transformation taking place within me. Physical recovery came surprisingly quickly. Within 6 weeks, I had regained most of my strength and was cleared to return to work. The neurologists remained baffled by my complete lack of cognitive impairment after such prolonged clinical death. They wrote papers, conducted additional tests, and eventually labeled me an exceptional case in the medical literature. But the true recovery, the inner recalibration, was a more gradual and profound process than anything that could be measured by medical instruments. My relationships changed dramatically. Colleagues who had known me for years commented on the difference in my presence, noting a new quality of attention when I listened, a deeper compassion when I spoke. My patients, especially those approaching their own transitions, seemed to recognize something in me, a shared understanding, perhaps, or simply an authentic empathy that transcended the usual professional boundaries. They began to confide their fears, their hopes, their spiritual questions with a new level of trust. Without explicitly sharing my experience, I found myself able to comfort them with greater certainty, to sit with their suffering without the old anxieties and defenses that had once limited my effectiveness. Death no longer appeared as an enemy to be fought, or a failure to be mourned, but as a sacred threshold, one that I had glimpsed from both sides. Perhaps most significantly, my understanding of purpose shifted entirely. Before my experience, I had measured success through accomplishments, through problems solved and tasks completed. Now, I recognized that the quality of presence I brought to each moment, the degree to which I allowed divine love to flow through me without obstruction, was the only true measure of a life well lived. Small acts performed with great love began to seem more significant than grand gestures motivated by ego or obligation. I found myself deliberately slowing down, creating space for genuine connection, prioritizing people over efficiency. And in that slowing, that presence, that priority of love, I discovered the most profound secret of all: that heaven isn't just a future destination, but a present reality we glimpse whenever we choose love over fear, whenever we see the divine image in one another, whenever we embrace the holy adventure of becoming more fully human in the image of the one who created us to love.